Hi, everybody. I'm Bernadette Wagner, in case you haven't been with Prime Time for Women before. And today we're being joined with Jen Silbert. She's here today for a program called Courageous Living. This is her second in a series of 8. And she's going to guide us on this journey of self-discovery to lovingly explore our fears and the fears that hold us back, and help us create practices and habits to become the authentic, brave women we want to be. As we always say, that all personal growth involves change. It's inevitable, but the impact can play out differently in each person's lives. And that's why Jen's here, to help us make conscious decisions and choices that are best for each of us individually. Today, Jen is going to talk about the fears that hold us back, and she's going to help us explore the resistance to moving forward. So Jen, thank you so much for being here. Before I do that, before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to say that you are the founder of Raw and Naked Living, and that you reach out and serve as a life coach to women, and also you're a nutrition and fitness expert. So thank you for being here and for supporting women.
Thank you. I love what you do. So I'm very supportive, and this is we're serving, I think, similar communities. So we have needs, and we both have similar values in recognizing the power of connection and how that makes us stronger, healthier, bright, more brave.
Absolutely. And I think that the energy that you bring to Prime Time for Women inspires everybody who watches it. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time to be with us. And I understand today that you have a couple slides that you want to share.
Yeah, I thought that the topic today was deserving of maybe peeling away some layers and better understanding the complexity of the process of change, because I think we all, we're going through a change, or we've been through a change, and change is inevitable. So we all know that we'll be faced with change, but how we go through change and what's happening in our brains that prevents us from making change, and maybe some misconceptions about what's involved in change, I thought deserved a little bit more attention. And so I went ahead and created slides. But before I do those, can I just throw out a situation that I find myself running into frequently in conversations with friends and with clients as we reach prime time on that subject of change? Okay, so let me just give it up for many of the self-aware women who, at some level, I believe all embrace a desire to become more awake and more enlightened and more aware of who they are. They want to grow, they want to expand their reach, and they're open to some element of change. But what I'm finding is a very common theme among primetime friends and clients is that they themselves maybe can adapt to change and are open to it, but the people around them aren't as open to change, specifically their significant others. And I am so amazed at the number of conversations becoming so common of women, mostly it's their partners or their husbands, who just are not open to change. And it's having an impact on their relationship. And they all resort to varying levels of, I don't like to use the word conniving, let's say strategizing, okay? Because they're always looking for new ways to maybe say something differently, make their case more eloquently, or use just some other sneaky strategy that they learned so that their husband will change.
So let me ask you a question. So yeah. As a life coach and as somebody who studies the change, is what you want to help them achieve is the necessary change so that they can give up trying to change others?
That's definitely part of it, because acceptance is a key concept in this. And you'll see as we'll get into that in the slides, as is resistance. But what I'm trying to capture in these slides is really the whole cycle of change, which is not the same as the cycle of grief, but it's recognizing that psychologically, emotionally, we go through different stages throughout the change process. And there is a place where we end up getting stuck. And I'm not letting us women off the hook by any means, because there are a lot of places that we get stuck in our adventures in life. And of course, there's all different areas of our life where sometimes we want change, sometimes we want more change than we're capable of making happen, because there's so much we can do. And then the rest of it, we have to let go. But I would say, yeah, some of it is just accepting. Okay, let's cutting right to the chase.
But that requires a change. That requires a change in them to give up this desire to change others.
Yeah.
Right? It requires. Yeah. So anyhow, Jen, I just made you a co-host because I can't wait to see the slides. And,
okay.
We will take a look at those and then have a chance to discuss more further.
Okay. So this may take a few minutes because I have a number of. Here we go. It's perfect. So I'll count on you to let me know that you can see this. Can you see this cultivating courage?
I can.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to go to present mode. I'm trying something new in this program called Canva, which is a graphic design program. And so instead of using PowerPoint, oh, this looks pretty good.
That looks lovely.
Yeah. I love it because they have a number of templates. You know, I'm all about like trying to make things easier these days, right? And all these years of creating PowerPoints, and then you start off with a blank slate. This is on the topic of change. I'm open to change and trying something different. But PowerPoint has been like the workhorse of presentations. So times change. And now Canva has all these great templates out there, and all you have to do is pick one and modify it. And I'm like, oh, this looks good. I think I'll just do this. So, hey, this looks pretty good.
You're teasing me. Let me see it.
I'm teasing you. I know. Let's go. Let's go. All right. Let's move the screen down here. And start by acknowledging that in the end, it really does take courage to change. And that is the topic of the series. This is part of the creating authentic courage. So we want to still stay focused on authentic courage, because there's plenty of room for us to buy into choices that are maybe not authentically ours. And it might be choices that we feel we're expected to live up to, or choices to make, a person to be, values we should have, self-concepts we should have. And it takes courage to break away from those expectations, right? And so we want to just emphasize that this is all about authentic courage. And this topic today is about cultivating courage to change. And the bottom line is nothing changes if nothing changes.
Right, I like that.
You know, so some wisdom can just be so succinct, right? I mean, a one-liner, and yeah, you know what? That's the point. So it takes courage to change. And if, as I mentioned last week, if courage is involved, it means there's fear involved, because you don't become courageous if you don't have some fear you're walking into. So the bottom line is, when we understand our fears, we're going to be in a better space to make change. So this presentation is designed to help us to understand a little bit more the complexity, the layers behind our stuckness. When we find ourselves in life and we're not able to make a change, and it's designed to also create some self-compassion, not just for us, but for others, because we all walk into change in different spaces. Some of us are more courageous and willing to step into change, and others need to take longer and walk more cautiously. So this journey also involves being more empathetic to ourselves as well as to those around us when we're looking at making change. the bulk of this presentation is going to focus on understanding the change cycle. And in this way, I think we can better understand where we might get stuck when we're looking to make change. So let's start with phase number one. When we first recognize that we're not happy with something in life, we recognize that there's a need for change, but somehow we're just kind of dealing with the situation. We're just getting by. We're not happy, but we're not motivated enough yet to move on to the next phase. And this phase could take a long time. It kind of depends on your level of self-awareness. Honestly, who wants to live unhappy for longer than they have to?
It also might depend on your ability to withstand pain. Like some people have, they're more tolerant, right?
Right. But think, we might have mentioned this last week, or maybe it was in another conversation. Maybe it was in navigating change, about when the going gets tough, the tough get going. We all have different levels of resilience and tolerance for pain and suffering. But I think we still have to recognize that sometimes even the people that come off as the strongest are really the softest on the inside, because that's been a layer that has protected them from some kind of wound or some kind of trauma, or they're clinging to some kind of a self-image. I don't want to pick on Marine sergeants, but for anyone that grew up in a Marine family where dad was maybe a little bit tougher when they were growing up and you got a little crusty, okay? Sometimes you're afraid to really let that guard down, and you feel like you have to be tough. And so you can withstand a lot more pain. But the bottom line is, somewhere that catches up to you. Somewhere you either harden yourself to the beauty of more intimate relationship connection because you've been protecting yourself and saying, I'll endure the pain. Maybe it's you're in a relationship where you're constantly rejected, or you don't get that intimacy, but or there's physical pain. But somewhere that's an aside, but just an awareness factor that, yeah, you might be able to withstand a little bit more pain, but why carry on longer than you have to?
Right.
Bottom line is that first phase is when you recognize that you're not happy with something. And let's say, you're not happy on the job. Okay, so now there's the canary in the coal mine. You recognize you're not happy, but you just kind of hang in there for the time being because you haven't had a chance to move to the next phases and really explore, well, what are your alternatives? Okay, you may feel you're stuck in that stage and never go to the next phase. But after we're done, you'll be able to see you've got options after that. You don't have to stay in phase number one. Okay, but this is your familiar space. So this is also where it's comfortable. This is what you've known, whether it's your job, your relationship, your home, whatever it is. Okay, then phase number two is you reach a breaking point. Eventually, that unhappiness gets to a place where it's building up a lot of stress, a lot of tension. Maybe you're constantly exhausted and fatigued now because you're coping as much as you can, but it's just reaching that breaking point and it becomes unbearable. Okay, so that realization is coming to your mind. So then what's the next phase? Well, now it's time for you to make a decision. And you either embrace the idea of change and choose to take the next step and feel some hope, or you choose to stay where you're at. But if you've created an awareness already that you're not happy where you are, then if you get to that next stage where you're faced with the option of making a decision and you don't, this is your choice. But it's then so easy for us, because it's safe to be even in a dysfunctional environment, it's so easy for us to start becoming victims and pawning off responsibility of taking action and making a decision to just blaming your circumstances. So this is where it can be very easy for us to become victims or martyrs, or just like, woe's me, and attract a lot of attention. And that maybe becomes a coping mechanism for you to deal with your inaction and basically your fear of going forward now to the next step. Is all making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of probably reality check here for a lot of you. Yeah, that's me. But then here's where we go into the next phase where you're no longer feeling empowered to make change. You're starting to feel the fear, okay? And that fear is now starting to trump the benefits of the change, and you're starting to feel all those emotions. And in another few slides, we're going to explore some of those emotions. And they're scary emotions, and they're uncomfortable emotions. And now you get anxious, and you're starting to wonder whether or not moving forward to make this change is a good idea anymore. And you might end up staying here for a while longer, but how is that going to manifest in your life? How is that fear showing up? How is it affecting you health-wise? How is it affecting you emotionally? Certainly, it's going to rob you of something. Okay. And here is just the frustrating reality of this cycle, which is now you're starting to rethink your decision in the first place. You're saying, you know what, man, maybe my situation is not so bad after all. Maybe I should just kind of like stay where I'm at, because the fear of moving on is just more than the discomfort of staying where I was to begin with. And I don't know why, but all of a sudden, the story of the Israelites leaving to the promised land just came to mind. And sometimes we like to pick on the Israelites an awful lot, but here was a group of people who had been in bondage and slavery for hundreds and hundreds, about 400 years. And they're finally, Moses comes in, he finally frees the Israelites, and they now make the exodus into the desert. And after weeks and weeks of living in austerity and starkness in an unfamiliar environment, they're starting to regret the fact that he took them out of slavery to begin with. And they're starting to look back and go, wait a minute, we might have been slaves, but you know, we got a decent meal. We knew what to expect every day when we woke up in the morning. And you know, that's not looking so bad anymore. And now they're getting angry at the fact that they were taken from bondage and having those second thoughts about whether or not the alternative is really as appealing anymore. Well, that's kind of where we can get. It's almost like we get this amnesia and we forget, because that fear has now just dominated our brain, and we're not sure whether or not we should go forward. So you forget why you wanted to change. So then that last stage here is, now you just say, oh, forget about it. And you end up actually talking yourself out of making that change. So you backtrack, and you either go back to where you were, or you stick with the item that you want to change, but you basically just talk yourself out of it altogether. So you're back to square one, and you can stay in that cycle forever and ever and ever. But somewhere along the line, we are stuck in one aspect of the change. And the question is, can you see where you get stuck? Do you recognize any of those phases right away and know, aha, I know where I am. I don't even go beyond phase one. But this is where the work begins now. This is where we start looking to tap into our courage and courage tools and methodologies and techniques, mostly mindset, because a lot of it is perception. Matter of fact, most of the resistance we have to change is our perception. So how do we break the change cycle? We've got a couple options here. One of them is that we continue with the pain and suffering, and we tolerate it until some extreme circumstance happens and it pushes us to have to make a change. So maybe you've been dreading your job, but you've been tolerating it, and now all of a sudden you're let go and you're forced to have to make a change. Now there's going to be a lot more pain and suffering because you were planning for that change. You knew you didn't like your job, but you weren't ready for it. So now you just inflicted on yourself more pain and suffering because you didn't take action on that discomfort when you had it. It could get so bad that the stress is so intolerable that you have a nervous breakdown. You finally just lose it. You do something drastic, and that's probably the hallmark of the midlife crisis. And I feel bad for saying this, but I think it's usually the guys that get a bad rap because, like there's the guy that all of a sudden overnight goes out and he's got this little, Miata convertible and decides he's going to leave his family, and he quits his job and moves out of state, and he, gets a young girlfriend. It's an extreme example, but it's an example of how someone just reached their breaking point and now they just had a breakdown and just said, okay, that is what propelled them into making change. And then unfortunately, it's a regrettable change and it could have been prevented, but you didn't deal with it and you let it go on until you reach this nervous breakdown. All kinds of other reasons. And in my own personal life, I've talked about my story a lot of time where I knew change needed to be made in my life. And all of a sudden, outside circumstances just I was barraged with all kinds of setbacks, and it basically forced me to surrender. And there was a lot more pain and suffering in that process than me just making a decision. So I definitely know this. Or one of your other options to break the cycle is to just choose to become more self-aware and to be more honest, that you own your choice. So wherever you are in the cycle, you just sign up for responsibility that, yeah, I did this. Now let me take advantage of the opportunity to learn more about myself. Why am I so afraid to make this change? Why am I stuck? And this is where many midlife women, especially, begin to re-explore who they really are. And this is the group of women I tend to attract in my coaching business, are those that are now at a crossroads going, okay, I'm unhappy. I'm open now to making a change. I just don't know what to do or where to go next. But you're open to evolving. Which choice do you think would be the most ideal when you want to break that cycle?
Self-awareness, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. So let's get honest and let's be compassionate with ourselves, because one thing that we do sometimes too often is we beat ourselves up for not being strong enough to make a change or not being brave enough or whatever. And let's start by being compassionate with ourselves. We bring a lot of history and a lot of baggage and a lot of real fears to this space of change that get in the way of moving forward. And although I could have probably had this up there as a big slide, accept yourself. Let's start with self-acceptance. Let's start with self-acceptance, and then let's move into this. What are you afraid of when it comes to change? And here are all kinds of possible fears that we're dealing with when it comes to what basically is uncertainty. And when you go back to the anatomy of our brain, it's important to understand that our brain wasn't wired for happiness. It was wired for survival. So when our brain detects a fear, which includes the fear of uncertainty, and that is on the other side of change, we don't really know what to expect when we go there. It's going to get triggered and it's going to survival mode and it's going to protect you because that's what it was designed to do. only when you intentionally look to hijack that process with this self-awareness and with the self-discovery work, can you make that change. So be compassionate with yourself, but be brave enough to move forward. So I don't know where you found yourself here, but maybe you're nodding your head and going, yeah, I can see. I could see. Some of this is ego, though. I'm going to focus on that too, because sometimes the reason we don't change is because our egos are kind of getting in the way. So here we go. Why have you avoided change? And what's really, really important in this process is getting honest enough to admit whether or not you really even wanted to change. So my husband let me use my husband for an example. And he already knows this story, okay? So I'm not kissing and telling, but we'll just use my husband as an example of many other smokers out there who want or say they want to quit smoking, mostly because their partners are nagging them. Their moms are nagging them, or their wife is nagging them, and they're like, I know I should quit smoking. And so they maybe make a change and say, yeah, you're right, I should quit smoking. And lo and behold, sometime later, you find a pack of cigarettes around the house, hidden somewhere, and you're like, oh, I thought you said you were going to change and you were going to quit smoking. Oh, yeah, I meant to. But what happened there? Did they really want to change? No, they really didn't. And maybe they weren't being honest with themselves. They wanted to change because they wanted to please you, but they didn't really want to change because it was good for them and it was their own choice. So you have to want to change. This is important for any of you that are trying to change someone else, because this is the reality. You know, if they don't want to change, they're not going to change, no matter how sweet you ask, how many different versions, pleading, nagging that you use. If they don't want to change, they're not going to change. But another reason we avoid change is because maybe you don't really know what you want. So if you don't know what you want, there's still that area of uncertainty. And so you're not maybe ready to jump in because you don't have that other choice. Or maybe your dream of the alternative isn't big enough. And that's what's stalling you from making change. It's in your head, but you're letting your fear be bigger than you and bigger than the benefit. And this is where, if we work together, we would work on the mindset and the perspective to help you to move beyond and see a vision that's bigger, so that it becomes bigger than your fear. Another thing is that we get attached to these things that we need to change, and they become our identity. And this is a really, it's a very real space that a lot of people find themselves in, but they actually get attached to their dysfunction and they become identified. This is particularly true people who have chronic health issues that know that they need to make better choices so that they're healthier, but yet they don't do it. And that is because this being sick has become their identity. Being at the doctor's office, having regular doctor visits and having all that attention, it unfortunately is very dysfunctional, but they get stuck in that zone. And somehow you're just benefiting. Otherwise, you'd be making that change. Do you see yourself in any space there on why you might be avoiding change? One key concept, in addition to self-acceptance, is resistance. And if you realize that the enemy here is not change, because change is inevitable, it's a part of life. The seasons change, the planet changes, we evolve, it's inevitable. What is the enemy is your resistance to change. And that's what we need to explore further. Why am I resisting? And that is where all of the pain and suffering happens, in that space of resistance. The resistance was a good thing, right? I think we talked about you know, in the underground during wartime or something, the resistance gets a good name. And then there it's good if you're going to resist evil, or you're going to resist oppression. But anyways, when it comes to our own self-growth, resistance isn't good. I have to say, this little proverb, which we call the Serenity Prayer, this is a great tool for leaning on for wisdom and for forward motion if you find yourself stuck in change. This is so simple, and most people I know are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. This goes back to the 1930s, but look at the key concepts in this Serenity Prayer. You're looking for serenity to accept the things you can't change. This is a key component of change, is to accept what you can't change. And only when you can accept what you have no control over and you can't change is when you can find peace. And then you can benefit from the better health and the serenity that you're going to get by just accepting. We also need to find the courage to change the things that we can. So you go back to that cycle of change, and you see the areas where you're not content, and you break it down and you go, what do I have control over and what do I not have control over? If there's something you have control over, okay, sister, it's time to be brave. And we all have it in us. We all have the capacity for change. But then there's that space of knowing what can I change and what can I not? And that's where we seek the wisdom. And so that is where the work in our life is. Figuring out how to accept what we can't change, get brave enough to change what we can, and just get wise enough to know the difference between the two. I think one example, we'll talk about this in another upcoming week, is the courage to speak up. And that's an area I think in particular where we find we seek wisdom to know when should we speak up and when should we shut up, right? So there's a space in there for wisdom. I got a bunch of little tidbits of wisdom. Some you probably have already heard and already know. Well, I want to kind of leave us with simple words of wisdom for the journey. All change is going to start within us. That's where it all begins. And I have spent years of my life, wasting years of my life trying to change people around me, only to find that in the end, if I change myself, I, by default, make changes around me. The people that are not healthy for me, they just fall off the map when I make changes. And it's pretty amazing because by default, the world around you will change. So you can't change anyone else but yourself. Change is inevitable, but how you respond to issues around you is what's going to determine your suffering. It's challenging, but it's possible. You can teach an old dog new tricks. So that old misconcept, okay, it's just, let's throw that out the window. It's by choice. So I don't buy into that anymore. You know, it's just that you chose not to. So just be honest and say, I don't want to change because I just don't feel like it. Okay, cool. Anyway, I can accept that. But be willing to let go. And this is where I think is the most beautiful part of this process, is when you just embrace what is and let go of what you don't need. That process of releasing, whether it's forgiveness, letting go of people, of stuff, that's a brave thing to do, but it's great. Know yourself, your boundaries, and the hills you want to die on. Be brave enough to embrace your vulnerabilities and release your ego, because sometimes it's all that's at stake here is our ego and how we feel this is important to us, and not really think about the other people involved in this, and be open to new perspectives. So I do have some homework. I don't know if you want me to jump into this right now and want to have a conversation and then jump into this, or if we want to just throw these out there.
Okay, well, why don't we close out the slideshow now, and we could have the conversation. You could always talk about this later. You probably don't need that. But yeah, that would be lovely. I appreciate all the work that went into that slideshow, and I took some notes. If other people have questions, I'm sure that they can reach you through Raw and Naked Living. I will put your email address and website in the chat. But I wanted to say that, or ask a question. So you were talking a lot about change, and as change is something we choose or not, but a lot of times change happens to us and we don't really have, it wasn't because of something we did. We are, I don't want to say the victims of change, but it was nothing we did that required. And so I wanted to ask, I understand what you're talking about when we get stuck, but how does your message ring true when or how do you deal with change that is forced upon you? Like a sudden loss or a tragic death of a loved one, or maybe a loss of a job. That's a different kind of change, I guess.
It is a different kind of change, but in the end, how we respond to it is really what makes a difference. And now we get into the topic of resiliency and our ability to cope with change. And this is an important part of our courage process as well, because to become stronger, we should be flexing those resiliency muscles on a regular basis and inviting change in baby steps so we can practice getting used to change. And we talked about that possibly last week or maybe in the navigating change, but this is it's a very good point, because inevitably change is going to happen. How we respond to it will determine the length and the size of the suffering that we'll endure in the process.
Right.
And some of the principles we talked about in this presentation, we can still apply when we are faced with change that we had no control over. Because now we can just look inside of us and first off, go back to wherever now that is forcing discomfort on us. We could probably just go back to this whole change cycle and go, okay, we're feeling uncomfortable with the fact that we just lost our job. Because that's a change that we don't expect. All of a sudden you get a pink slip, and now, I mean, the whole pandemic was a big change. And
that's exactly what I was thinking about. Together, all of us throughout, not just our little community in Hagerstown, Maryland, or the state, or our country, but the whole entire world has been thrust into a position where out of their control, there's all this change that we have to cope with. And so one of the other thing I wanted to mention in response to something you said, you were talking about letting go of things. And I so appreciate that, because I think that part of the wisdom, when you talk about finding the wisdom within yourself, when you talked about the Serenity Prayer to change, is this idea of looking at where you are now as compared to where you were before, and say that I have changed or I have evolved. And what was once really good for me, which was a great coping strategy, which was effective, which was purposeful, which was intentional, doesn't mean that it's always going to be that, right? I mean, sometimes we have to let go of what worked for us one time because it no longer works for us. I mean, my analogy in my own brain is, and I haven't really changed that much in my body shape over the years. So I still have some really old clothes that still fit me, but darn it, I'm not wearing them. They don't work for me anymore. Let them go, you know, give them to Goodwill, or cut them up and use them in a quilt or something. But, you know, I thought when you said the wisdom to know the difference, that's to me was the analogous for that comment.
Oh, you know, and this is good, because we could spend a whole lot more time on this. There's so many other layers because just like you said, that space of the wisdom to know the difference, we could do a whole presentation on that. We could spend a lot of time on that. And when we talk about the courage to make these changes, there are many tools out there, and there's a lot of coping strategies that we can tap into. And there are things like meditation and self-care is a big one. I'm big on self-care. And I think that there are some coping strategies that rise above the rest as far as being more effective and impactful. Then, taking a bubble bath is great, but I've got a number of other great coping strategies that can be much more impactful when you're in more of a high stress environment where the change is bigger. But think about it. Maybe your partner says to you, I don't want to be married anymore. And all of a sudden they want a divorce. Look at that. I didn't ask for that. That's a big change. Now what am I going to do? All of this, though, what happens outside of us should invite a re-exploration of who we are, because that's really, besides understanding that how we respond to that change is important, is embracing it. This is where we accept it and we let go and invite a re-exploration of who we are. Because just like you said, some of the things that worked for us before don't anymore. And one thing that comes to mind might be, as I mentioned, the hills that we want to die on, which represent our values. Okay, what are our values these days? What is really important to us? Because those values help form the foundation for boundaries we're going to set in life. So let's say, let's use another example of how a friend betrays you. Okay, that's something that happens, and we don't ask for that. It's a change that happens suddenly. Now we've got to make a decision, or we're going to keep that friend in our life. We're going to let them go. I'm sure that many of us will decide this isn't a healthy friend to have. Maybe we can reconcile, depends. But we're probably going to relook our boundaries now, right? We're going to look at, before I invite new friends into my life, what is really important to me? What wounds did I feel? What pain did I feel that I'm going to maybe try to protect myself from next time? So, see, I think there's a place where we can just embrace the change and then invite more self-discovery of who we are.
I think that's a good point, because as we invite self-discovery, part of that is the willingness to invite other perspectives and other viewpoints. And, I think you and I talked one time about the science behind cognitive dissonance, this idea when you have a long-held belief, something that is really important in your life, to consider another perspective. You don't have to agree with that, but just letting that reside side by side in your brain and giving it some considerations. The thing that they now know is that your brain, in trying to reconcile the difference, actually creates little, this is neuronal connections. I don't know if anybody, I talk with my hands all the time, but I like the idea that in talking with, I don't want to hang out with people who just validate me. I want people to challenge me and to share their whole selves, not just share the part that they think is in line with my thinking, because that limits them and it robs me of the chance to grow and to consider new perspectives. And so that is an area of change in my life. There was a long time where I knew what was right and I wanted everybody else to say you're right. And if they didn't agree with me, I had to set them straight. And yeah, my poor children.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of, my children.
Yeah, but it's really, to me, my life is richer and fuller, getting to the point where I can say, and I think it's part of being in my prime, and it's part of talking to other women, and it's a big part of prime time for women. I didn't want to have an organization where it was like-minded women or my tribe of women, because I think it's so imperative that we hear from different viewpoints, that we know different cultures, that we understand different political views, that we look at spirituality from a number of different dimensions, that I don't have all the answers. And so that is the single biggest change in my life. So almost everything you said, I went through the fear of that. I didn't want to change. I was resistant, all that you said. But I will tell you, I kept at it. And there were many things, like you said, along the way that I didn't necessarily choose that became an impetus to move forward, to be open.
I'd like to ask you a question on that, because as I know that we're getting ready to sum this up, but you bring up a very good point. And I'm just curious what your motivation might have been to continue to move into that change. Maybe not recognizing what the benefits would be on the other end, but maybe more to say, I know this will challenge me and I will grow as a person, because so that means you have a growth mindset. But you brought up these other benefits that maybe are not always clear, which are, I'm going to have a fuller life, a richer life. I will be more tolerant by embracing.
Way more tolerant.
Way more tolerant. Now, I wouldn't say that if we were to put those benefits out at the front to say, this is what's on the other side. So when you step into that fear of change and you make that change, what's on the other side is, I think all of us have to come up with those ourselves. It could be you change the job and there's a possibility you'll have a new job. There's some element of faith involved, right? And trust in this process. But what would you say motivated you when you were willing to keep working through that change to say, I'm going to do that?
I think for me, honestly, I think above all else, I value honesty in relationships. And I think almost all of the change that I made was in an attempt to be in an honest relationship with different people. And I think the reason it was hard was because I had to then admit, and this was a change, that I didn't know everything, that my perspective wasn't the only perspective, that other people's reality, because they are different creations, they have different expressions in the world, and we are shaped by our experiences, that is also valid. And that created, for me, it was very difficult for a long time to say that I don't have to agree with them. If I can hold that here, but I don't agree with them, then I must be wrong. And where I am right now, Jen, which is the change of my life, is that there is more than one right way to be in the world. And I think that's sort of like a divine realization in my life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is excellent. This has like been a golden nugget, I think, in this conversation, is really getting to that space where you realize that the ultimate awareness, I think, thinking of Maslow's hierarchy, right? And when you're getting to the top, when you reach the ideal of self awareness and enlightenment, is to know what are the benefits of reaching that space. Because I think we might know that's the place we should be going to, but why are we trying to reach that? And you just explain that so well. And that motivation of, I more just the humility, I think, in that is saying, I just recognize that there's more than one viewpoint. And probably because I want to connect with people.
Can I share a little analogy with you that?
Oh yeah, I want to get a pen though. These are so good. I just have to write this down. Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's worth writing down, but it has been really helpful to me.
Okay.
My husband is a wonderful gardener, and I used to garden. I don't do as much of it as I used to, but I still weed. And one of the things I realized working in the garden is that some flowers do really, really well in acid soil. Others do much better in basic. And the colors of the blossoms change depending on what you do with the acidity. Some flowers thrive in shade. Others need full sun. Some need partial sun. Some need fertilizer, some don't. So, you know, some need a lot of water. Others, like in our rock garden, if you gave them water, they would all die because they do better in dry soil. So there's whole thing was, if I wanted everybody to be just like me, there'd be one freaking color, one flower, one plant in my garden. It would be ugly. It would be boring. It would be, you know, just so blah and bland. So to me, I have this idea that all people, not one flower is better than another flower. Even weeds have a really important role to play. And so this idea for me that we are the blossoms of the universe, and the beauty is in the diversity, not in the sameness. So I know that might sound corny, but for me, that was like something I could articulate in my journal, and kind of, it gives me a visual picture for the feelings that I have.
I love that. I love that. And that's so applicable when it comes to the relational challenges that we face, and the places for change that we need to make in relationship. And that is oftentimes the bulk of many of our decisions. The rest is really being authentic to who we are, which is why I keep coming back to that authenticity, because just like you mentioned, and it was just so beautiful, as how we're all different, and there's space for diversity. Is we each have different sets of values. We each, we could just play this into the whole environment today, where we have found it more difficult to communicate with each other if we're not on the same page, and we don't all speak the same language, and we don't buy into all the same beliefs. But boy, we could talk about this for hours, but this,
and I know it's almost time to go, and you wanted to give us
very quickly,
a journal homework assignment.
Should we do that? Okay, we'll give us a little homework assignment, because that makes it a very practical exercise then. So if you find yourself facing change, or you'd like to prepare yourself to be more resilient to change in the future, here are some journaling prompts to help you along the way. And I'll just very quickly just run them down. Question number 1, understanding this change cycle. How can this change cycle impact your life as you move forward in future change? Are you ready? Are you finding yourself stuck somewhere along, and are you ready for the cycle to stop? What are the costs to you if you choose not to change? I can also see this line of questioning being great for someone in our life who maybe we've been wanting to change and has been resisting change. Maybe these are good questions, to think of. Are you ready to become more self-aware and become more honest? Are you ready to take full responsibility for your decisions and create the life you want? And are you at the point where you accept nothing less than what you really want? And this is the authenticity, because we don't want to buy into what we think we should do. We want to buy into what is authentically us. A key point here is really change before you have to. Start practicing strengthening those courage muscles, those resiliency muscles, by looking at making little changes every day. Take a different route to work. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. Eat something different at the restaurant instead of what's familiar to you. Because our attachment to permanence is going to be the cause of our suffering. And I know you can do this, so go be the change. That's it.
Well, that's great. And you sounded a little bit like a Buddhist there about non-attachment. I love that you managed to embrace all these different traditions. And I so appreciate that, because, we are speaking to people, to women from different backgrounds and different cultures, with the goal of finding common strength and support. And so I thank you for your words of wisdom. And I'm going to look forward to next week. And next week's topic, you want to give us a commercial?
That's right. Next week's topic is cultivating the courage to be. And what I'm referring to is what happens when we become still. And feel the emotions in the moment, detach ourselves from the identity that we live out every day, and really get to the root of who it is that we are, removed from that identity that we're living out. What happens when we disconnect from our busyness and live in stillness? And this is the foundation of meditation work, of
It's the
mind,
foundation of yoga, right?
of yoga, all your mindfulness practices. But it's only in that space where we really can come face to face with our emotions. And it is an amazing practice for busy women who maybe are avoiding the stillness and just being, and knowing that you're okay just by yourself, not attached to anything else. We're going to explore that with some exercises next week.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Courageous Living with Jen Silbert. Prime Time for Women is so grateful that you're part of our community, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So keep us posted. We'll see you next week, Wednesday at 3 o'clock.